Dear viewer, imagine this. An empty street bathed in the golden haze of early evening. Marcus was just minutes away from home. A grocery bag dangled from his hand, his mind on the chicken stew he'd promised to make for his mother. Then, flashing red and blue, a police cruiser swerved in front of him, tires screeching. He froze. Not out of guilt, but out of instinct. The kind passed down through generations. The officer's hand lingered over his holster. No questions, no reason, just a glare. And then, from somewhere behind, a voice rose. Calm, commanding, unshakable. And everything changed. Marcus Bennett was 32 years old, a school counselor, and someone who had spent his life avoiding trouble. Raised in a small suburban neighborhood, he had worked hard to create a life defined by community, stability, and service. Every morning, he walked to the high school where he worked, greeting students with warmth that came from experience, because Marcus had once been that kid who felt invisible. He lived with his mother, Clara Bennett, in a modest brick home she'd owned for 25 years. She was the kind of woman who knew every neighbor by name and never let you leave her house without a plate of food. Marcus had promised her that tonight he'd make dinner. But as he left the small local store, grocery, bag in hand, the streets felt unusually quiet. The air was heavy, almost expectant. He walked quickly, his sneakers tapping against the cracked sidewalk. Then came the blinding flash of patrol lights and the sharp growl of an engine. A police cruiser cut sharply across his path, blocking him. The officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. Marcus had seen this look before. The silent calculation, the searching for a reason to escalate. His chest tightened. Marcus wasn't a stranger to stories of black men stopped for fitting a description, stories that rarely ended with an apology. He knew that, in moments like this, every move mattered. His fingers tightened around, the grocery bag, the paper crinkling under his grip. Dear friends, moments like these are why some walks home feel longer than the miles on the pavement. The officer circled him slowly, like a predator assessing prey. He asked for ID in a tone that wasn't a request. It was a demand layered with suspicion. Marcus complied, pulling his wallet from his pocket with deliberate, visible movements, the way his mother had told him since he was 16. Never give them a reason to think you're reaching for anything else. The officer glanced at the license, then back at Marcus, scanning his clothes as though fabric could tell a crime story. "Where are you coming from?" he asked finally. Marcus explained, just the store, a few blocks away, groceries for dinner. But the officer's face remained unreadable, his eyes narrowing as though the simple truth wasn't enough. The street around them was quiet, too quiet. The faint sound of a TV playing somewhere in the distance only made the air heavier. Marcus could feel the tension curling in his chest. Every second the officer lingered felt like a gamble with consequences far beyond his control. The questions turned sharper. "You been around here long? You sure you're from this neighborhood?" Marcus's mind flickered back to the stories of other men, uncles, cousins, friends, who had been stopped in their own streets, accused of trespassing on the sidewalks they'd grown up on. A second patrol car pulled up, and now two more. Officers emerged. 3 sets of eyes, 3 sets of hands close to their weapons. The odds shifted, the danger multiplied. Marcus tried to keep his breathing even, but his heart was pounding against his ribs. One officer began to walk behind him, slow, deliberate. He knew the tactic. Box the person in, leave no escape. Marcus realized that he was no longer answering questions for information. He was performing survival, every word and movement calculated to avoid becoming the next headline. And then it happened, a brief radio crackle. A voice on the other end, urgent but steady. The lead officer paused, his head tilting toward his shoulder mic. Marcus couldn't hear all the words, but he caught fragments. "Leave him. Stand down. Someone's watching." The lead officer stiffened. He turned sharply toward the direction of the voice. That's when Marcus saw her, a woman stepping out from a house across the street. Tall, poised, wearing a dark blazer that caught the fading sunlight. She walked with authority, every step measured. The woman crossed the street without hesitation, her heels clicking like a metronome that measured every beat of the officer's growing discomfort. She didn't shout. She didn't rush. When she reached them, she stood between Marcus and the officers, her back straight, her head high. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that made the street itself seem to pause. She introduced herself, not to Marcus, but to the officers, her name, her title, and her department. She was a civil rights attorney, well known in the city, and she had been watching from her porch since the first flashing light. "I have already started recording," she said evenly. "I also have your badge numbers. You are detaining this man without cause. Unless you can articulate a specific lawful reason for this stop, you are in violation of his rights." The air shifted. The officers glanced at each other, suddenly, aware that the balance of power had tilted. The lead officer muttered something about a misunderstanding and matching a description, but his voice lacked conviction. The woman's eyes didn't leave his. "That excuse has been used for decades to justify unlawful stops. Not tonight, not on my street." Marcus stood silent, his chest tight with a mix of fear and disbelief. He had expected the night to end with a cold story to tell his mother, maybe worse. Instead, here was a stranger who had stepped into the storm without hesitation. One by one, the officers backed off. No apologies, just a retreat, the kind born from knowing they'd been caught in the act. The cruiser doors slammed shut, engines revved, and within moments, the flashing lights faded into the distance. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there, the paper bag still in his hand, the groceries inside now warm from his grip. The woman turned to him, her expression softening. She asked if he was all right. He nodded, still processing the sudden turn of events. She told him her name again, this time for him, and explained that she had been documenting incidents like this for years. "They count on no one watching," she said. "But sometimes, someone is." Marcus walked the rest of the way home in silence. His mind replayed the encounter, the stares, the implied threats, and then that voice that had cut through it all. He thought about how easily the outcome could have been different, how quickly things could have gone wrong if not for that interruption. When he reached home, his mother was waiting at the door. She looked at his face and didn't need to ask. He told her anyway because some truths must be spoken aloud. That night, as they ate dinner, Marcus realized something. The fight against injustice wasn't just in courtrooms or protests. It lived in moments like this, when an ordinary walk home could turn into a battle for dignity, and when a stranger's courage could change the ending. He knew the system wouldn't change overnight, but he also knew that silence and inaction were the ground where injustice grew. And maybe if more people chose to speak, to step forward, to refuse to look away, the weight pressing on his community's shoulders might one day lift. Dear viewer, if this story moved you, I invite you to join me in sharing more stories like this. Hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and tell me, if you saw injustice unfolding right in front of you, would you have the courage to be that voice? Because sometimes the difference between tragedy and justice is one voice, choosing to be heard.